All right, looks like it's back. All right, so just like all the other times, we'll have, if you want to watch the videos, it'll be split up into two parts instead of the usual one part, but it will work. I've confirmed that. I don't know what the problem is here, but anyway, so what I wanted to do is show you this video before we carry on. So let me get Moodle open now. Okay. Okay, here it is. So like I said, it's a little bit silly in time at times, but it's worth watching it. It really is. So let me just send you the link. And let's look at this thing and see what we think. All right, here we go.
chamber, which must have an area of 16 stalls. In modern algebraic terms, we can represent this polynomial.
All right. Well, that was okay. I mean, it was fun, kind of interesting. But you often find that a lot of these results were developed surprisingly early. Like the Babylonians having to write out everything with pictures because they didn't have algebra yet. It must have been pretty tough, but they managed to do it somehow. So yeah, math has been built on many different developments over the centuries, and it's easy to lose track of how hard and long it took to get to what we have now, because we do tend to take it for granted, don't we? But all right, anyway, so here's what I'd like to do, because there's not that much time left. And remember what we're doing next week. Chapter 6 problem set on Monday and sample midterm on Thursday. So the next chapter after 6 is actually chapter 8. It's a completely standalone chapter. It will actually represent the entire second midterm, by the way, but it's a very different area of study because it involves concepts that you'll see in the real world every day. Well, you probably do now, but you, especially once you graduate and you start working and you have money to invest, but you also might find yourself needing to borrow money. So what we're going to approach in chapter 8 is something you've heard about. You may not have known exactly what it was all about, but that would be the concept of interest rates. And so interest rates, as you probably know, are what you are paid when you save money, or else what you pay when you borrow money. So if you've ever had, let's say, a credit card, you know that when you use your credit card, if you don't pay the balance every month, you have to pay interest. So the question is, how is this interest calculated? And of course, there are a lot of other important questions too. For example, what kind of interest rates are you being charged? But that's really a separate issue. Here, we're more focused on actually calculating the interest rates themselves. And so it's a very interesting area of study because it affects so many aspects of our daily lives. But sooner or later, it's the kind of thing where you can't really avoid it, because down the road, at some point, you'll be investing your own money, and almost certainly you'll be borrowing money as well in order to finance the purchase of a car, for example, or to buy a house, or somebody to buy things you need for your everyday life. You might go to the store and buy groceries with your credit card, for example. And so when you do that, you're borrowing money. So it's awfully important to understand what interest rates are, where they come from, and how they're calculated. And so we're going to address some of these questions, at least in this chapter. We can't get to all of it in one chapter, but we can at least introduce the most important concepts. So we're going to start out with the concept of simple interest. And this is based on the idea that when you leave money in the bank, after a certain length of time goes by, the bank credits your account with interest. And so how much do they pay you? Well, that depends on several factors, such as how much money did you put in the bank, which we call principal. Or by the way, though, the word principal also can refer to a loan. In other words, if you put money in your bank account, that's principal. But if you borrow money from the bank, that's also referred to as principal. So the word principal actually simply means the amount that you've borrowed or the amount you've lent. We also, in order to calculate interest, we need to know how much time is involved. In other words, did you leave your money in the bank for a year or 5 years or 10 years? Or did you borrow money for 2 years or 5 years or whatever the case may be? And finally, the rate of interest. Now, if you've ever taken an economics class, just as a quick detour, interest rates in the US are ultimately determined by an organization called the Federal Reserve System. You may have heard of them. They're usually called the Fed in the media. They have the power to determine what level of interest rates we have in the economy, but they don't just randomly pick the level of interest rates. Interest rates are chosen to be consistent with strong economic growth, low inflation, and low unemployment. So like I said, if you've been in an economics class, you're familiar with these concepts. If not, sooner or later, you will want to become familiar with these concepts because, again, they will affect your daily life when you're working and saving and investing and borrowing. At the moment, interest rates are very low. By historical standards, interest rates are very, very low, which is helpful to borrowers, but it's harmful to savers. In other words, if you're saving money right now, you're not getting a very good rate of return. But when it comes time to go buy that first car, though, you'll be happy because the interest rates are so low. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this, which we will not get into here. But if you're curious about this, suppose you want to know what interest rates have looked like throughout US history. There's an excellent website called FRED, which stands for the Federal Reserve Economic Database. It is maintained at the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank. And what we could do here is ask Fred to show us the history of the so-called federal funds rate. That's a rate of interest that banks charge other banks for loans. And so this is what it's looked like in the last 50, 60, 70 years. You can see here we are now. Rates are really low. They were a little higher before the COVID broke out, but then just before that, they were quite low. You can see they go through these peaks and valleys. And so, you can see we're really at a low level right now, whereas up here in the early 80s, rates were really, really high. Here, they're very, very low. So back here, this is where you want to put money in the bank. You'll earn a very high rate of interest, but you certainly don't want to pay that to borrow money. That would have been very painful. So here, we're at the other extreme. This is the time to be a buyer rather than a saver. So if you're out there looking for a house, this is perfect for you. So, but interest rates come through these cycles over time. And so this is normal. You go through these ups and downs. It's like a big roller coaster. You should just be aware that right now, at this point in time, interest rates are very low by historical standards. Okay. And so the Federal Reserve System is ultimately responsible for keeping it there. Now, their rates are there right now because the COVID certainly slowed down the economy quite a bit. That's one of the reasons why rates are so low right now, but it's not the only reason. And as the economy wakes up from COVID, you would expect to see rates going back up to more normal levels. So in the next few years, you should expect to see rates going up, maybe not much higher, but higher than they are now to reflect the strength of the economy. All right, so now we're going to introduce some variables for this chapter. The letter P will from now on will represent principal. And again, that can either be the amount you've borrowed or lent, depending on what situation you're in. It's a dollar amount. R, the lower rate, capital R, lowercase r is the interest rate. Now, interest rates are always expressed as a percentage. For example, let me just show you a quick case. Suppose that you want to buy a new car. The bank gives you a quote of 6% for the loan. This means that you will pay 6% interest on the outstanding balance from your loan. Okay, so 6% means that that's how they figure out how much you owe them. The original amount you borrowed plus another 6% based on the outstanding balance, the amount you haven't paid back yet. And so 6%, the rate of 6% means 6% per year. So I just want to mention that that's an important detail. Rates are normally quoted as so much per year unless it tells you otherwise. Okay, so in other words, it's not impossible for you to be told that the rate of interest that a bank pays is, let's say, 1% per month. But normally interest rates are only quoted on an annual basis. So it's 6% per year based on how much you've borrowed. If you're depositing money in the bank account, they'll give you another number, which will be lower, of course. In fact, that raises an interesting point. The rate of interest that a bank pays to savers is always lower than the rate that it charges to borrowers. Okay, so for example, if the rate charged for a car loan is 6%, the rate paid on savings deposits or savings accounts might be 1%. So how do they get away with that? Doesn't it seem like they're ripping us off? They're only paying us 1%, and yet then they're turning around and charging 6%. Well, no, this is how they make their money. The difference between what they charge you and what they pay for savings accounts or other deposits, that's where their profits come from. Now, what we have to keep in mind with the bank is this. The bank makes its profit from the spread between the borrowing rate and lending rate. The bank is being compensated for the risk that it takes when it lends out money. So in other words, what could go wrong for the bank with this business model? In other words, you say, well, this is great. They're borrowing money from customers at 1% and using that to finance loans to other customers for 6%. What could go wrong? Well, when lending money, there is always a risk that the borrower won't repay the money, the loan. That's the risk that the bank is up against. How do they know that you're going to pay the money back? Well, they don't. Although in the case of a car, at least with a car, they can sell your car. They can repossess your car and sell it if they have to. But that's a very costly process. So they'd rather avoid that if they can. They're just hoping that they can lend money only to people who will actually pay it back. And if that happens, their profits will be pretty strong. But if they lend money to a lot of people who don't pay it back, they could actually end up losing money. So banking is a very risky business. It can be very profitable, but it can also lead to disaster if people don't pay their loans back. So anyway, from our perspective, we're trying to calculate what rate of interest we're paying and how much it'll cost us when we borrow or how much we'll earn when we lend. So let's look at some of these other variables. T is time or term, which will be always measured in years. Now, A represents what we're going to call future value. Basically, think about this way. If I put money in the bank today, how much will it be worth in the future? So if I leave $1,000 in the bank for a year, how much will I have in a year later? That's what the future value means. All right, and then finally, now you notice we have another variable which seems to be the same as this one. Interest? Not really, because this R is an interest rate, which is a percentage, and this I is also interest, but this is the dollar amount. Okay, the dollar amount. So just to give you a quick example, if let's say $1,000 is deposited for 1 year at a rate of 5%, the interest paid to this account is 5% or 0.05 times 1,000, which is 50. So in this case, R would be 5%, but capital I would be $50. So they both refer to interest, but one is a percentage or rate, and the other one is a dollar amount. So we're going to need these variables for what's coming up next. We're going to see them a lot. Okay, so we're going to do a lot of calculations with these variables, so we need to know what they mean. So, and just by the way, the next time you happen to find yourself in a bank, or in some cases, there are banks attached to supermarkets and you can just wander in there, just take a look and see if you can see how much interest they're actually paying on the different accounts that they offer. And you'll see that it's very, very low right now. But you also might be able to find out how much they're charging on loans, and you'll see it's quite a bit higher than what they're paying on their deposits. And that's how they make their money. So that's how the game works. So, all right, anyway, so I guess we'll stop here because, you know, we want to now focus our attention on the chapter 6 problem set for next Monday. And then again, we'll do this sample midterm on Thursday, and then we'll be ready for the actual test. Okay, when that happens, then we can get back to chapter 8. All right, so in the meantime, if there's no questions, we'll stop right here and I'll see you on Monday. Make sure you write out all your answers to the chapter 6 problem set to make sure you really understand what's going on. Okay, so I'll see you then.
All right, take care.
Okay,
Have a good one.
see you later.